I'm opening. We have an eye, sort of a nostril, 2 teeth. One of the teeth has a small cavity. Close call, folks, but I think we got here just in time.
Presented by Maria Menounos and Kevin Undergaro. This is Anatomy of a Movie. In-depth discussions and breakdowns of various movie titles. And now that you've seen the movie, let the dissection begin.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting off happy, and I picked this song in particular, obviously from Aladdin, called You Ain't Never Had a Friend Like Me, because we're doing a Robin Williams tribute today. Because although we can't really call him a friend, we haven't had a friend like him, and never will again. Obviously, this is a couple days after his tragic passing. I am Phil Svitek, joined alongside Demetri Panos.
Hello.
Sara Stretton.
Hi, guys.
And Chloe West.
Hello.
Now, Chloe in particular, she was very emotional to do this.
And I'm already crying.
But one of the, I convinced her to do this show because one of the reasons why we do these tributes we've done, I think this is our third one.
Sadly, our third.
It's for us, it's a way of remembering and kind of coping with the loss of the person that we talk about. And, hopefully, sharing it with the world and you guys get to cope with us. For his death, I go to Patch Adams because there's so many things relevant with that movie. And Sarah has a great quote from the movie.
Well, I have the quote that you're talking about, Phil.
Yes.
And for those of you who haven't seen the movie, it really is something you probably want to watch around this time. It reminds you of all the good that he gave people, and the movie centers around a character who brings just a light of joy to people who are ill. And Robin Williams had that gift to bring joy to so many people constantly. Even in his serious roles, his dramatic roles, he was always able to also bring this layer of warmth and genuine nature. But the quote from Patch Adams is, "What's wrong with death, sir? What are we so mortally afraid of? Why can't we treat death with a certain amount of humanity and dignity and decency and, God forbid, maybe even with humor?" And so that, I think, is something that we all are trying to kind of take away from today, is that as sad as we all are, what we focus on with Robin is that sense of humor and laughter and continuous bubbling up amounts of happiness. And for me, it just comes down to how you see a picture of him and it's just like his eyes. He's just so giving. He lets you in and you just feel like he wants to share with you 100% of the time. And so that just constant giving of self and bringing joy to people is what I would take away from his memory and keep in my heart. But that's your quote.
I know. And the reason why I picked it, because, as we do this, yes, we will insert a lot of his humor throughout because, it's part of the natural healing process. I want to begin with, Sarah, you kind of mentioned what he meant to you a little bit, but I want to go down the line. Chloe, do you want to go first or do you want to go last?
I'll go first.
Okay, go ahead.
I think what's so interesting about him I think a lot of people feel this way is they've never really been this sad about a celebrity passing. And I think the reason why is because Robin for me felt like your movie dad. I mean, we watched every film. I feel like in my childhood, he was in it, whether he was voicing or, acting in it. And it was every year I got to see him in something. And so he felt like part of the family and just was always so great and funny, and I could turn on anything and I would just watch his part and you would know it would be great. He wouldn't leave you feeling empty in any way.
I learned this, there's obviously a lot of fun trivia coming out about him, and the amount of stuff he brought to each role, with Aladdin in particular, one of the reasons why I played this was that script was going to get nominated for Best Original Script, but it couldn't because he improvised so many of those lines for Genie that they were just like, this is not original.
He actually went in and recorded the lines, and then they just animated around it all because he improvised so much of it.
And Sarah, what
That was some controversy too back then. Because Aladdin was such a good movie, and this was a time when they didn't have, I believe, a best animated feature. And how do you recognize a movie that was so good? And again, this was really too at the height of like animation from Disney. They could do no wrong. They had Beauty and the Beast. I forget my chronology, whether it was Lion King. I think Lion King came on after.
Was after.
And they had
I think
Little Mermaid was
before.
first. And, Beauty and the Beast. And, this was, people anticipated the Disney animated movie to come out. And when Aladdin came out, everybody you just talked about the Genie's performance and how Robin Williams carried that movie. And when you couldn't nominate it for that, it was sort of kind of a bummer. It was like, well, I know it's not written, but
It is original.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. For me, I remember that time going, that's you. Why are you penalizing the man? Like, why are you penalizing the movie for this fantastic quote unquote performance? Yeah, it was a bummer. I remember. Yeah. That controversy.
Yeah. Anyway, Sarah, what? Let's go to you.
I mean, I spoke a little bit just about how I think he was such an amazing performer, but I think on top of that, one of the things he embodies to me is he found a way to have like the Peter Pan syndrome and bridge kind of a gap between childhood and imagination and playing and being a very serious adult who takes on crucial issues and can, play roles that are like fathers and psychiatrists and people who are dealing with really big issues, but also bring in a sense of fun.
Yeah.
And his ability to simultaneously have both of those capabilities, which are so many times pushed away. Like, you either are the class clown who's making a mess of everything and can't take everything seriously, or you're the person who people can go to for answers, for inspiration, for some sort of knowledge. And for me, whether it was just the roles he chose or was given, or just like hearing him talk and like hearing people speak about him, he was able to simultaneously do both. And there was never a block. It wasn't that every moment that was serious had to be serious, and every moment that was funny he had to make the biggest laugh out of. He could flip back and forth between both, and I just feel like you wanted to watch him. He's someone that I would have no fear of, like people talked about how he's one of the greatest guests to ever come on talk shows, because you knew that he was just going to be present and be there and give himself to like the audience and to who he was talking to, because there's a care about life. But yeah, that bridge that somehow he was able to stand with one foot and being a total kid and one foot and being, I guess, an adult, and just own that space is something that I really appreciate and like hope to be able to do.
Before we get to you real fast, Demetri, that's
Sure.
interesting you say that, Sarah. In high school he was voted least likely to succeed and class clown. Mm-hmm. So, that already right there is almost kind of the meshing. And then now going to you, Demetri, you know him from way back when, all the way to Happy Days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, Robin Williams goes back to February 28th, 1978, when my favorite Orkin played on an episode of Happy Days, where this alien lands to interview Richie Cunningham, who he believes to be the most uninteresting man in the world. And he finds that he believes in Richie Cunningham. And then hijinks ensue. And from that show, his performance as Mork from Ork just captured a nation. Now, I have to bring this up because things have changed so much. Robin Williams is as much a part of the time, and his popularity and fame, it wouldn't happen today. You got to understand, a show like Happy Days, in its prime, was getting a 31.5 rating on television. And when you compare that to today, what would you say is the most popular sitcom?
Modern Family.
Big Bang
Big
Theory.
Big Bang.
Well,
In its
the best
day,
ratings.
its largest ratings is anywhere from like a 12.5 to an 18.
Wow.
So television back in the day, I say this is like 1978, there weren't the distractions. We had 3 networks, and then we had UHF channels, and then we had PBS. And you watched what was on. There was a good quality to it. Like, I was a huge Happy Days fan. Happy Days was the water cooler talk show, was the water cooler show. So of course that next day, as kids going into school, we're imitating Mork from Mork because he was hysterical. And then Gary Marshall, one of the producers, they do a spin-off which becomes Mork and Mindy. And to this day, I still remember the pilot season where, you know, Pam Dauber's Mindy comes out with a carton of eggs, and his Orkin spaceship looks like an egg. And it was like, you couldn't be a kid and not throw an egg up in the air and go, fly, be free. And then it cracks down on the thing. And it was just so silly and manic that my mom used to find the show like just too silly. But for a 12-year-old kid, it was hysterical, like laughing in tears, and then going back into school going, Shazbot, nanu nanu, fly, be free. And it was just amazing. And then what did it for me was, and again, when you're talking about TV in the day and being able to, what you had to watch TV because there was no, you couldn't time shift. You didn't have it in a DVR. So you watched every week. You sat down in front of your TV to watch every episode because you didn't want to wait for reruns. And then HBO comes along because this is also at the height of what cable starts to reach into the marketplace. And what HBO did was something amazing. It led an audience into comedy nightclubs. And HBO broke Robin Williams. I mean, as much as popular as he was in Mork and Mindy and Happy Days, once he did An Evening with Robin Williams, that was it. And as a kid, like, to watch this manic man just like the way he walked the stage, walked into the audience. I mean, I still remember some of the jokes, which were like he was making fun of Marin County and going, Marin County sexually transmitted. They don't get crabs, they get the lobsters. He's like, Lacoste, fuck that alligator on the shirt. He goes, they take a real live alligator and nail him to the door and stuff. And he just would go off on tangents. And then he'd go, and meanwhile, he'd go back to his routine. And it was just amazing. And as a kid, you're just floored by this. And this is how I got into watching comedy and stand-up comedy. And so much has changed since then that sadly we will never, I don't see us ever having that because we can't go back. And because we're so fragmented and our attentions are so all over the place, when you look at Robin Williams and Eddie Murphy and Paul Reiser and a bunch of these people and how they came up in the world. Like, it was a time like when you went from TV to movies, that's what they aspired for. That's what they went for. Where today now we have Academy Award winning actors and actresses wanting to be on television show. That's how they're finding work. But Robin Williams, I remember when he went to go see Popeye, wanted to see it, not because it was a Robert Altman movie, because at that time he didn't mean anything to me, but it was Robin Williams playing Popeye. And he did a great job, and it was amazing. And then he does something completely different. He does The World According to Garp. And I had read that book by John Irving, and watching Robin Williams, you got it. Like, you understood, and already he's taking on a different role. And what's sad, it's just very tragic because I really do feel like I've grown up with this man. And, you talk about his how he can play. He's very versatile. But he was very versatile in his comedy acts. Mm-hmm. And just how he can switch from characters so simply. And this is, again, at 12 years old, 13 years old, you don't necessarily quite know what improv is. But he was just so all over the place. And he wasn't so dirty that I couldn't watch him with my mom. But I mean, there were four letter. I mean, my other favorite joke of his is the New York Echo. Hello, shut the fuck up. And again, these are all Robin Williams moments that I will always truly treasure him as being the comedian, going into acting, making movies like Popeye, like The World According to Garp. And he ended up doing so much more than, like, Eddie Murphy is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but there was never the versatility. He had no fear in choosing a role because it might be serious. He did A Moscow on the Hudson. That movie, when you see him playing a Russian, I mean, he nails it. And again, very sympathetic. It is not a broad comedy. He didn't necessarily have to do the broad comedy. He could have done that his entire career had he wanted to. Thankfully for us, the movie lovers, we got to see him in A Good Will Hunting. We get to see him in, like, Patch Adams. We get to see him in what's it, one photo right now.
Yeah,
sorry.
1 hour photo.
One hour photo. We get to see him in Insomnia. We get to see him play a villain. What comedian? Like, I've never seen Eddie Murphy play a villain or Steve
Jim
Martin.
Carrey has tried.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't. He makes it work, and you always, as an actor, whatever he was going to be in, I paid attention to. But as a kid, if Robin Williams was going to be in a movie, even Club Paradise, not a good movie, but just seeing him in a trailer, I was going to go. An underappreciated comedy, Cadillac Man, he's with Tim Robbins, one of my favorite movies of his. So yeah, for just going back to Mork from Ork, and as a kid, just imitating him, just imitating his voice, and playing around, and just pretending we were Mork for Ork because it was so silly, but he did it so playfully. And the one thing about him as a guest spot, you never knew what you were going to get with him. Like, and it wasn't that he was going to be in and be offensive. He didn't rely on being offensive for his comedy act. You just never knew what the hell you were going to get on any given day. And even on happy days, even when he was doing that, all of that, they say, was all made up. It was off script.
So what does that mean? All these things, like, what is he, like, if you were to bottom line yourself, like, what does that mean?
It means
what does he mean to you in that sense?
A very amazing talent is tragically not with us. It means to me that, sadly, through illness, through his addiction, which he was always ended up being open about. That's another thing about him too, is that before we had the TMZs of the world, some celebrity would hide it, and they would be able to hide it. Robin Williams, we knew when he was going in rehab, and it was sad. It was a bummer. And knowing what happened this past week, and realizing, like, when I first heard that he had passed away, I thought maybe it was a heart attack, or maybe suicide was the last thing from my mind. And when that came out, that was like, that is just horrible and tragic. And then of course we get the news about the depression, which I am not going to talk. I'm not a doctor. But to be, I mean, how sad and tragic that to be in this world, to have so much love. I mean, there was so much outpouring of love, like, by tweeting, social media for this man, to have so much of it and to be depressed and to have that set in. It's very, very, to me, it's very tragic and just a sad way to lose a gifted, talented man who gave so much of himself as a person. He gave in his performance. He wanted to work. He wanted to make people laugh. And that's the greatest gift that I think anybody can do for someone, is to make them laugh. And to have him, like, for it to be a suicide, to me was a shock. And I still have trouble dealing with that.
Right. Phil, what about you? What is he like? What is his career and stuff and what he's done meant to you?
I mean, I've obviously grown up with him and things like that. One of the things for me that I want to talk about, is his body of work is so amazing, right? Mm-hmm. But there's so many things beyond just what the obvious things are, right? Whether it's Hook, whether it's Fisher King, Jumanji, Aladdin. For me, I'm a huge Patch Adams fan, and that's kind of the more obvious ones. But whether it's The Final Cut, right, which is an actually interesting movie if you really dissect it, where he plays someone that is an editor of people's memories. So upon their death, their memories he downloads, for lack of a better word, and then cuts up, an hour special, for the funeral. And it's interesting because it works in both ways, because he's creating something that's so magical, and yet he's learning about these people's dark, dark secrets. I thought that was an interesting movie of his. Another one is What Dreams May Come. I believe most of you have seen this, yes? Mm-hmm. I find that to be beautiful. And if you look at his body of work, upon reflection, it always deals with life in some sort of way, right? Whether it's Hook, there is an actual line in Hook that he says to Hook, Hook's like, your next adventure is death, and he says, to die would be a great adventure. And so it's interesting, kind of upon reflection, all those lines and how art reflects kind of his life in that way, and I just find amazing. We have a lot of movies still of his coming out, so he hasn't quite left just yet. For me, it always takes a little bit more time than others to really have it sink in. I don't know about you guys, but I immediately went back to some of his movies. And most people that I, from Twitter at least, I see like, hey, I'm watching this movie of his. I'm watching this movie of his, and whatever the number one movie of his to them is, they watched. And for me, I try to do something, I try to grab a movie that perhaps I hadn't seen. Yeah. And just to get a different variation of him, that perhaps maybe it didn't make me as sad or whatever, but just honoring him in that way.
I would love to know, to go through the panel, I would love to know what, if you could choose one movie, what, your favorite, or maybe it's, maybe it's Mork Mindy, maybe it's a TV show, but like, what was your favorite performance of Robin's that you find yourself watching over and over again?
Oh my God, that's so hard, because I actually, like, some of his movies are in my, like, rewatchable ones. Like, I have a section of, like, just movies that I've seen so many times that it's almost embarrassing. But like, so I went back this week and I actually went to go watch two movies. So I watched Hook, which is on my list of literally watched it over 100 times. So I rewatched part of that this week, and then I went to go also watch, which I keep messing up the title, What Dreams Are Made Of.
What Dreams May Come.
What Dreams May Come. Thank you. And that's I have now at my apartment. I'm going to watch, but up there is going to be, you mentioned it earlier, and I have a similar feeling about, he felt like my film dad version of, like, it's like, this is what I thought in movies, like, Bob Williams is the best film dad, and Mrs. Doubtfire. Yeah. Always. And I was just like, she reminds me of my mom, she's all serious, and this is my dad, and he's so funny, and so that movie, I always, like, I just felt like I was in their family. Yeah. And I felt like he was, like, my film dad in that movie. So that one always, like, just strikes a chord. And that was, to that movie in particular, is it's a long comedy, but it has the right blend. There's so many comedic moments, and yet by the end, you're tearing up because of what's happening, and it's an ironic ending because it's not quite 100% happy, but it's a life, and it just managed to do so many things so well. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy movie. The whole premise is that he's been taken away from his kids, and that he's had to find this crazy disguise to get back in their lives. Yeah. What about you, Phil?
What about me? Shoot. I thought I was going to get to go last. The Birdcage to me is really funny. I like him in that. Good Will Hunting. I do like Good Will Hunting, not to the level of perhaps other people, and don't hate me for that. It's just that his other work to me just resonated a little bit more. But if I had to, is it the most rewatchable to me? Perhaps not, but I really like him in Patch Adams, and partly because my mom was in the medical industry, and I really like the idea of that, and really treating human beings instead of just diseases and things like that. And especially like how this ties in, I don't know, but like there's the new show, The Nick on Cinemax, and that's in the 1900s, and how they treat. They're literally, there's a patient there, and the doctors are standing over them, listing all the things that are wrong with him, and he's going to die any moment. And you look at the inhumanity of that, and what obviously Patch Adams is a real character, but I think Robin Williams himself had such an affinity towards that actual human being that they resonated so well.
Yeah.
And he, I just think it's interesting because I know like in real life he continued to embody like that work, like even so much as like he had friends in the hospital and would go in and be the one to make them laugh.
Absolutely.
And go in and put on accents and put on scrubs and just be that fresh air in tragic situations.
By the way, not to make this any sadder than it is, and I don't know if this is, but like Philip Seymour Hoffman and him, they have such great scenes in that movie. That's another reason for me why I picked it. And and to me, Philip in that movie kind of plays a little bit more himself, where he is a little bit deep down and troubled. He has that great line of, no matter, I know the book inside and out, but I cannot get whatever her name is to eat, but you can. And it's just so tragic, thinking about it now. I mean, it's been less than a year apart that
they're both so great, and they both have
and that's
strengths.
I don't know if that's the only movie that they're in together, but this, now thinking about that, that's another more kind of depressing thing for me, and why I chose that specific movie.
What about you, Demetri?
Well, for me, it's definitely a lot of it's his stand-up. That's when my eyes came wide open as to who he was, and making that leap and going into that world of stand-up comedy and seeing Mork from Mork, who is a family television show, and seeing this guy just do all these characters, and he was great. And I was a big fan of his earlier movies. Later, we haven't mentioned things like, Good Morning Vietnam, to me was another, like, he had a great story. And I was like in college, learning about the Vietnam War, and he had this great story about this disc jockey who was trying to make a difference and do things, and he did it in this zany way, and you knew again that this is Robin Williams being Robin Williams, as Adrian Cronauer. He was so amazing in that movie, and the movie had its serious side, but it could make you laugh. So I love that movie. And then later on, I'm a big fan of Insomnia. I mean, when you take a man who can be so manic and zany, and then you pin him up as the villain up against Al Pacino, and then he makes it work, and it's a really good, solid suspense movie. Again, I say, he was able to accomplish what some other comedians, they just continue to do comedy, which is great. I'm not dissing that, but he at least tried.
Yeah.
He not only tried, he succeeded.
And for me, it's interesting. My top sort of three, it's like Aladdin, of course, and
of course.
It's like, how can you not? And then what's interesting is my other top two they're not comedies. It's Good Will Hunting, and then The Dead Poets Society is just
That's interesting, not to cut you off, but, so many tweets about, like, that movie made so many poets.
Yeah.
Specifically, but yes, continue.
There's something about The Dead Poets Society, and when it came out, and I think for our generation, I think it hit a chord because it was right at that time, when you're like, you just were those boys, you felt like you were in that class and he was your teacher. And I think everybody walks away from that movie like going through the arc that all those boys went through, which is it's so cool that like a movie can make you feel like you were in it and you were a student just like they were. And I think that's just really magical, and I think it's because of what Robin brought to the film and his vulnerability and his like just skills, and it's just really interesting, for all of us to like so many different things, but for a few of them to be, to go from stand-up being a favorite and then, two very serious films also being up there, like, hilarious broad comedy and then serious films. It's like, it's just, I don't know anybody else who you could say that's done, that someone's film could be like this, their favorite of theirs could be a broad comedy, and then somebody else's favorite is like this very serious hospital sad drama. Patch Adams was the first movie I could not stop crying in a theater.
Very sad.
What an artist.
Speaking of also Dead Poet Society, Dante, who plays Rufio in Hook, forgive me because I don't know his last name offhand. He saw Dead Poet Society obviously beforehand, and on the set of Hook, he would write poetry because of this movie. And I don't have the poem in front of me, but check it out. He wrote a poem in honor of Robin Williams. Thanks to his because of that movie, for his love of poetry.
And so many celebrities, I think that's the most interesting part of this, is I've never seen an outpouring like this.
And there's so much thanks.
Yeah, and
there's so much,
it's all
like,
amazing.
You've done, like, it's so much, like, thank you for inspiring me. Thank you for carving this, like, giving me a path. Like, it's so much. It's not just, like, thanks for being a great talent. It's thank you for how you affected my life and caused some sort of change or movement or direction. It's incredible.
Yeah, you sort of kind of wish that this came prior to what happened.
Yeah.
Because, maybe, who knows? Dead Poet Society is it's a very good coming of age story. But he played the professor we all wish we had in one way, shape, or form. You want somebody to teach who's as inspiring, and you want to come out of class feeling that invigorated about life and about, oh, Captain, my Captain. And that movie does not end on a happy note so much either. Sort of ironic. But, again, I just think, we all wish that we had a professor like that. Not that I can't say whether or not you folks had a bad college experience, but, if you had a professor like that, it would have made it that much better. And you want to be inspired that way, and a movie can inspire.
This Darren Aronofsky said this. He said, there's one teacher, I think, if we're lucky, there's one teacher that really changes our lives. And when you find that teacher, upon reflection, just write her a note, or him, and just say, you know what, you were able to change my life. Because being a teacher is, in the case of Darren, and I know I'm a little bit off subject, but, it was basically a 25-year investment, because afterwards he finally wrote her that note, like, hey, thank you for being a great teacher. You taught me a lot of these different things. And I think but at least it's in the spirit of what you're talking about. Like, had this outpour been there for him, a couple days earlier, then perhaps this wouldn't be the case that we're talking about him in the way that we're talking about him. Let's see what.
And I'd love to talk about his part in Good Will Hunting. I mean, that's what won him the Oscar.
Let's do it.
And how interesting, he gets the Oscar for this amazingly serious role.
And the story of that movie too, just in general, how a couple people from Boston, like the belief in that to make that happen.
And I mean, he's really the one who got that movie off the ground, because without a name like that, who's going to watch these two young boys from Boston making a film about boys from Boston, Yeah. Which is just so incredible.
It's hard to, like, even... I know they have put out their thanks for that. And, I mean, it was a feat for him, Demetri said, that he was able to change and progress, and that was just an acknowledgement of...
Yeah,
how
I feel like that
was.
It's so sad when it's hard for comedians to win Oscars. And I feel like that's almost what that was. It was like, this performance was Oscar worthy, but everything else you've done also has been like,
yeah, exactly.
This is sort of an almost like lifetime achievement.
For me, he spans so we were talking about the serious stuff, we're talking about the comedy, but whether it's the Fern Gully, whether it's Happy Feet, obviously Aladdin. It's the age range that he wanted to touch was vast.
Well, I think almost everyone at this table has said that they felt like they grew up with him, and we're all of different ages.
Yeah.
And everyone feels that way. Or not everyone, but
we're not quite as diverse.
But
three of us are somewhat similar.
But you can say that for people who are just watching growing up with like Happy Feet. Like it is consistent thing. A lot of people feel like he's attached to their childhood and attached to them growing up.
Yeah. And I think a major part of his success, and again, I just go back to his comedy roots, he was uninhibited. And for an actor, that's one of the best weapons that you can have. And so that you can play all these things. And again, I'll just go back to when you watch him play Popeye, it's a live action musical. It's directed by Robert Altman. And as Popeye, he's Popeye. It was fantastic. He was great. He was awesome in that movie. And, and again, as a kid going to see World According to Garp, which was rated R, but it didn't stop me to go seeing it because it was Robin Williams. Like, you wanted to go to see Robin Williams' movie because of, you just knew that, or were hoping that you were going to laugh your ass off or something. And I don't know, his uninhibitedness, like, he was great on The Tonight Show. He was great on all these things because you just
Inside the Actors Studio, I think his improv on that is one of, like, the most famous and just incredible. He takes a woman's scarf from the audience and does a 10-minute improv with it.
Well, see his stand-up comedy, and he does virtually the same thing. But he was just so, and again, he was something that as a kid you imitated. You imitated that. And again, I can't. This was back in the day too, when TV really did affect. Like, you wanted to imitate these heroes. You wanted to imitate. Everybody wanted to be the Fonz. Mork from Ork. You wanted to, like, you would literally saying Shazbot or Nanu Nanu was a way of just like making yourselves laugh as kids, and just to see how he grew up. And how he just changed as an actor.
Speaking
amazing.
He did Flubber, right? And obviously that was remake, reboot, whatever the term applies. And I like the original. Is it called The Nutty Professor instead? Yeah. Okay. So, and then Flubber. It's two very different movies, but he equally matched it to me. In terms of, and it's very different, and I can enjoy both films. And Flubber, to me, it's great because it shows his physical nature, physical comedy, which he's very funny with his lines, but then to see him in action, that was
part of his character transformation, his embodiment, and his physical attributes. But I want to point it out as well, is that to me, there's this like underlying sense of he could. I don't even know how to exactly put this, but you read that he went to Juilliard for a little bit, and then he had a teacher who was like, don't squander your talents here and go and use them. And then you have that he was like, he improv'd so much in scripted movies that are by big companies like Disney, like what, and for that to me is really interesting that people could recognize and just work with him and then be like, you know what, you are so talented, just go. Like, you have this genius about you. We don't want to try and control it. You just be yourself. Like, it wasn't as much as I'm sure he worked on his craft. He was able to grow. He was able to do all these different roles. There was also just this natural genius that maybe he did have just good teachers and lucky that he was allowed to expand and grow on them. But he stuck to himself, and he was able to do these things without. It was more of like, be free, go, because you are amazing, instead of trying to control it. And I think that that's just a very interesting aspect of his career.
Yeah, and he was so whip smart too. And again, you had mentioned James Carrey. I'm not the biggest Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey.
Jamie and Jim is the same. You mentioned him earlier. I'm not the biggest fan, and he fails to me where Robin Williams succeeds. To me, Jim Carrey, who always improvised and things, I always like, he needs a director who knows how to say cut, because they just let him go on too long. He's not that funny. He drags it out. With Robin Williams, I don't necessarily get that sense. When you see him in A Good Morning Vietnam and he's riffing off, Barry Levinson, who I believe directed that movie, I think they took multiple takes. I think they let him do, because Robin Williams knew he had the good sense to know not to go overboard, and I can be whip smart and I can use a prop as a joke, and he was just great, and he would do it in such a way that you would actually think that it was written that way for him. I mean, that was another part of his genius.
Like the genie.
Yeah.
You would never know that, like, that genie stuff wasn't written, and like, because it's in the songs and it's in
right.
I mean, it's just, gosh, it's so incredible. And I feel like Happy Feet is also very much like him going into the studio and then them animating around him.
Well, and they did that, like, even in his TV shows, they would write in the script, like, they stopped writing out sections, and they were literally like, and this is some free space. Like, that was written into the script, because they were just like, he can handle it.
Yeah.
He's going to make it great. He's going to be able to somehow balance being completely over the top and being able to call on himself.
But I think, I think the real craft, and you two as actresses, I think you guys can appreciate it comes from, to me, understanding the character intrinsically. Because I've seen it where you throw to an actor like, hey, just improv some stuff. If they do not know the character, then it's never going to work. They're just going to try lines and whatever, and some of it might stick, other times it might not, and but we're going to be there for hours and hours trying to find that.
Yeah, the beauty of it is he always can see his character's point of view, and he always makes them. What's so lovely in all his characters is they're all so different. He's given them all such a different point of view on life and how they view the world, and he really saw the way even a little bat in Fern Gully could view the world, and like how specific that point of view was. And just, I think that was his brilliance, is that he must have been such a great observer, because he observed the way all these different people, and you see it in his characters, the way that they view the world, and then he brings his enthusiasm and his energy, which is just completely unhuman. Like the amount of energy he brought to everything was just, I mean, that's why you would watch him, is because he was just this ball that was going, and it was just incredible.
I'm not going to pretend to put anything on him, but I think there's people in this world, and it's so rare, that no matter their problems, they shoulder the problems of anybody that they're with in a room. And I feel like he's that type of character, or that person that, no matter what his problems were, if someone was having a bad day or whatever, he felt like it was his role to uplift everyone. And I think that's the sad part, is that no one recognized in him, because he always perhaps did come in funny, that they didn't understand his problems, and they never looked at him of like, hey, you know what? Sometimes it's our role to do that for him. Yeah,
and to that point, and this past week, Conan O'Brien's story, which is a great story, in which Conan goes. This was a couple of years ago, when publicity-wise things weren't necessarily on his side for certain things, and Robin Williams, recognizing that, bought him a bicycle. Apparently, both of them, they're talked about, they're both cyclists. And Conan goes on to tell the story, but he goes, so I get this thing in this big package comes up. It's from Robin Williams. And I was like, what's he sending me? And then he opens it up, and it's the most ridiculous looking bike that he's like...
More so than Pee Wee Herman?
More so than Pee Wee Herman. He's like, this thing had like hood lamps on it. And he's like, it was the most ridiculous looking bike. And I called Robin to say thanks and say, it really cheered me up. He goes, is it ridiculous looking? He goes, yeah, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Good. He goes, are you going to look retarded riding that down the street? He goes, oh, I'm going to look awful. He goes, great, have fun. Go ahead, send me pictures. And I'm like, to your point, yes. I mean, he did want to make people better in their place. To your point about observation, any really great comedian is a great observer. And one thing about Robin Williams, like, he wasn't an impressionist. However, he could nail an accent like nobody's business. He could be Russian in 1 minute, Greek in the next. He could be Scandinavian. He could be from Marin County to L.A., loose. He was obviously a major he could observe people and the way that they act, and that came through with him. And again, it's just one of those things that makes it's sad to see a talent go. Harold Ramis passed away. He was a sick man, and due to illness, we talked about Philip Seymour Hoffman tragedy. this too, to me, is just like, it's just a tragedy. And maybe if somebody had reached out, or, now the news had come out, I think as of late yesterday, today it's broken out that he had early signs of Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
And, Michael J. Fox has gone out and said, I'm stunned. He's like, I would have been so giving and on his side and helped him out. And when you get to a place like I can't even fathom. Like what would get somebody to that place where they don't see, like, I have a beautiful wife, kids, maybe I don't know. I just don't know. And it's just got to be a horrible thing to deal with.
Yeah. Well, what are you guys to wrap this up? I mean, seeing how much he's influenced all of us, like,
I want to go to his daughter's.
His daughter's thing first.
Yeah.
Well, that's my kind of,
That's
how I would, for me, conclude, my thoughts on it. I really love, read it. There's a portion in there like, hey, he made everyone laugh. And for those of you haters out there, you know what? This is what he's going to do. You're going to wash your car. It's going to not have been washed for a while. And you're going to be so happy that a bird's going to poop on it. and that's what you get for hating. And then she ends it with, what we have to take away from this is that we've lost someone that made the world a better place, and we all just have to pick up the pieces.
Yeah.
I liked her initial tweet, Instagram, what it was about. I will miss him and I will always look up in the sky for him. Just to talk about that, God, just a new breed of evil is out in the world, and that saddens me too, that a tragedy like this, and his own daughter, who obviously she loved him very much, just sends this out. Maybe not the best way to go out, but she uses social media to say, I'm going to miss my dad. And to have people do what they did is just, to me, you're a sick individual. To hide behind social media and to put his daughter through like what she's going through, you're a miserable fuck. Like, you deserve like that, and to hide in anonymity, it's just horrible. And I feel when she says, I'm done, all you haters out there, that makes me sad, because compounded by the fact of how he passed away and how she may feel as helpless as anyone could right now. Just awful, awful, awful. And you want the family to get through this. You want the fans to get through this. And
yeah, I think to go along with that, I think what he would want is just all of us to sort of emulate the way he treated people,
Exactly.
Is like to take, I think what, looking at that and seeing how horrible that is just like, you know what, we should just always try and be that person that sends your friend a crazy bike when they're feeling bad, and like
perpetuate the joy.
Yeah,
the joy of life.
I think that's the biggest thing.
You have to.
Yeah.
And he'll be sorely missed. We have 4 more at least finished movies,
which I think will be hard to watch a little bit. I mean, I know people have seen the trailers for the Night at the Museum coming out, and they're just like, oh, it's hard to watch. But it's gonna be, I think what we can all take away is just like, is the joy, and and how great that like he will keep us all laughing. No matter how many times we imitate, or like, we always have that.
Mm-hmm. I was so thankful for getting to watch these movies the first times that I got to watch them, just from the fact that they did make me laugh, they made me cry, and I'm just now so thankful to have them.
Yeah. And
just to be able to keep watching them.
Absolutely.
And like I don't really have to let go.
Yeah, he's left us a wonderful legacy.
Mm-hmm.
He's immortalized.
Totally.
I
would love to know what everybody, if you guys want to write in the comments, like what your favorite Robin films are, and like which ones you guys went back to watch. I think that would be, and like what he meant to y'all. I think that would be really awesome.
And I want to, for this particular episode, JT in the booth, we'll just kind of do a quiet outro. We'll do a moment of silence, so JT, you can just play the credits over us. Thank you guys for joining us. It's not the circumstances under which we want to be doing these types of things, but
we should, And at the same time, as sad as it is, we should celebrate the legacy that he was and that what he brought to the world. Because he wasn't just an United States of America boy. He was loved worldwide.
Yeah.
So,
and I think to me, what comes out of this is, recognize, you guys are recognizing that he did touch so many people. If you know someone, take the time to get to know someone, and if brighten up their day. You know what I mean? Even if you don't know them,
thank the people who brighten up yours.
Exactly. And I think then perhaps we will see less of these tragic things. And even if the person looks like they're the happiest person in the world, thank them because they're brightening up your day. On that note, thank you guys for joining us yet again. Robin Williams, you are missed, and our hearts go out to the family. And that's it.
Nanu.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the rest of the Anatomy of a Movie staff, we would like to thank you for listening and subscribing to the show. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email or tweet us. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been Anatomy of a Movie.
Thanks for watching Anatomy of a Movie on YouTube. For more on your favorite movies, subscribe to our channel here and be sure to let us know what you think in our comment section below here. Bye.